Mario Bocaranda, welcome to Sam Weeks Consulting's YouTube channel. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Sam. It's a pleasure to be here.
For those watching, Mario is one of our clients from last year who secured the biggest scholarship pot we have ever seen in the history of Sam Weeks Consulting. And he's now a first year student at Wharton. So I've managed to drag Mario onto Zoom. I know you've got a really busy schedule, Mario. So thank you so much for joining to ask you about what it's like at Wharton, about your recruiting process. Mario is is pivoting into investment banking. And so we'll talk about what the investment banking recruiting process looks like. I want to kind of lift the hood on what being a first year student at Wharton is like. So, Mario, could you maybe start off by telling me about how your Wharton first year has been?
No, thanks, Sam, and it's pleasure to be here and talking to all your like viewers as well. I'll say it's a mixture between you always hear it's a marathon, not a sprint, but over here it's like really a marathon and a sprint at the same time. So it's quite interesting. It's being engaged on all thrusters all the time. And it's everything from the academic piece to the social piece, and the social includes like clubs, travel, parties, all the things that you would expect from just the MBA process. But then it's also very academically rigorous. And then you also have the third component or the third wheel there, which is the recruiting piece, which takes a lot of time. It's very engaged. You really do get access to a lot of different companies, a lot of different people at the top of their fields. So I think that those three things keep me, very involved on campus and then very active throughout. So it's been a lot, but it's been very rewarding.
Is the curriculum as difficult as people kind of expect?
So it, it's an interesting question, Sam, because I started, this is my first year when I started, and I was going through, all the different campuses that I've been, thankfully admitted to. I had that question myself to the students that were, either agreeing to meet with me or giving me tours on the campus, and this was across many of the, top 15 MBA schools in the US.
Hmm.
And a lot of people had this perspective of like it's not really that difficult. A lot of people were taking the MBA as more of the social aspect and then the recruiting aspect of these three wheel I guess process that I was discussing. So to me, it was a surprise when I really came onto school, starting in fall of last year, and I found that it was very academically rigorous. I don't know if that's a thing that changed, from my perspective, and like have the background in terms of how it was in 2024, 2023, or before. But to me, it's been really, I guess, academically rigorous. You have to show up on campus. There are certain, metrics that you have to fulfill from a participation grading standpoint. You really have to show up the, class. And it's not just, I think, of the nature of being like the first year and going through some of the core classes. So at Wharton we have core classes during the first year, and then we start getting into electives this semester, like the spring semester, and then obviously into the second year. But I just think it's been either maybe a change that the MBAs have done in the past, and I know this to be true. I have friends at Columbia and NYU that have sort of like had the same perspective, from their experience currently versus what they heard from the previous years. But yeah, yeah, it's been academically rigorous, to put it, like just summarize it.
Interesting. Yeah, people say the hard part's getting in, but actually, what you're saying is no, it's quite hard when you're here as well.
Well, yeah, from a work standpoint, like I'll say and I'll mention, obviously the perspective for most MBAs, not only Wharton, is that the focus should be on you making those networking connections and then, growing as a professional. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean that your grades have to be stellar. So we have grade non-disclosure at Wharton,
Mhm.
and that really allows us, I guess it's a policy that we as a student, as a class, vote on every year to decide if we're gonna disclose those grades to potential future employers or like just different people. And this year, we again, it's been a history of like voting for great non-disclosure. The, I guess the perspective there is that if we focus on more of the other things rather than the grade, we're gonna get the learning and the teaching and like just the knowledge there and then grow as a professional, like grow as professionals and be able to, overextend ourselves. Part of this idea of stretching yourself in the one community is putting yourself in events or in circumstances that you might not be fully comfortable, but they
Mm.
allow you that, like that outreach allows you to just grow as a professional. So for instance, if you didn't know anything about AI or I don't know, like tech coding or anything like that, you can take a class on Python or you can take a class on R,
Mm.
like just more statistics or quantitative focused, heavy classes.
Because
And
you're
you're
not
not
worried about having a bad grade that's going to
pretty
negatively
much
impact you further down the line.
correct, because like I know that for example in law school, L1, like the first year, it's super important for you, like the grades there on your first semester are super important to determine if you're going to get an internship for the summer. And so people really hunker down and like really study for that. Doesn't mean that you're not going to study at the MBA level, but it means you can take some risks there. Like really put yourself out there. For instance,
Mm.
like what I was saying, if you don't know anything about coding, you can go into a class, from zero and then really build up that experience and like those skills. Um, if that's what you want to do, or just gain a little bit more information or understanding on it. So really enables you to get that stretch experience down the line.
Is the curriculum as finance focused as people make out? Wharton's known as being a finance powerhouse, and you've got a finance background, but like, is that everybody? Is that reputation valid?
I think in some ways it is based on the alumni and the speakers that we get and the focus that we get on campus from different organizations. I would
Uh-huh.
say that it's probably one of the premier schools in terms of attracting PE, investment banks, just investment managers to come on campus and really engage with us. So that's great. But there is opportunity for other subgroups within the MBA community. There is a big focus on entrepreneurship on school, as well as tech in general. From my understanding, like I didn't really recruit for it, like I know it's been impacted a little bit in terms of and across, this is not just a Wharton, but across the MBAs in terms of the types of internships and jobs that people get. But there is a significant portion of the class that's also looking to get into tech, as well. From the class perspective, there is a focus on quantitative applications. So from our core, it's sort of like similar to other MBAs, to be honest, but there is a focus on statistics, on micro, economics. What else? The marketing classes are very quant heavier, quant focused, and that doesn't mean like math in the core. Like I guess like GRE or GMAT math. It's more being able to apply statistical concepts of looking at real world data, which is something I appreciate and I like, because our cases are not just hypotheticals or like management discussions on the qualitative aspect of things, but really taking data that's out there or was out there and applying statistical concepts into what you think you could do and how you would test it out there. So I would say that that's maybe where the idea that it's a quant heavy school comes from, but it's really like being a having been a professional prior to coming to school. I see that it's honestly the way things are done out there on the workforce, of taking data and then getting actionable solutions from it.
Mm. So they've sort of made a bit of a noise about becoming more kind of data driven, and they're leaning into analytics. It's something we see in a lot of their marketing material and stuff. So what you're saying is that really is the case. That really is happening.
Yeah, it really is happening. I can't say how much more versus other schools, because
Sure.
obviously I only have this experience. But one thing I've noticed, this year is like the applicability of how much that data analytics piece is being angled towards the AI, boom,
Mhm.
and how to use AI to just analyze different sets of data. In the past, for instance, I had a marketing class that's applied marketing dynamics this semester, and in the past, the professor said he would have taught you how to code on R or different statistical software, how to just analyze the data. Nowadays, he just showed us how to prompt the AI and like the output, and like with the basic understanding of what it is that you're asking and looking for, but how you can use some of these uh, just agents to do a lot of the work for you,
Mhm.
and how you can verify that data coming out of it. So I think that there's a big focus on using that quant heavy just focus of the full MBA into now improving it with AI and like different technologies.
It's interesting you say that, because one of the questions that a lot of MBA applicants have been asking in their interviews is asking the interviewer, "So, how is the program adapting to a world of AI?" And what you're saying is like a lot. Basically, it
Yeah,
doesn't seem
yeah.
happening.
I mean, we got a major this year that's all on AI for business.
Mhm.
And a lot of the classes themselves, even if they're not AI related, they're trying to incorporate AI elements. I think it's undeniable that it's going to be a big difference for the future. Even within my recruiting, this past semester, a lot of the employers were asking, how do you use AI, how do you prompt AI, how you see it impacting our business. Because I think that, I'm sure we'll get into it at some point, but the value add potentially of going into an MBA nowadays, it's like I see it a little like in the 2000s when there was a boom in technology. Obviously, there was a bust, with the Y2K recession, but like a boom of a lot of companies pushing into that technology piece.
Mhm.
I think that from the workforce perspective, a lot of managers and a lot of people that are there looking at the AI and thinking, how can we apply it into our business? And being an MBA coming into the workforce now, that's what I feel a lot of the managers are looking for, that know-how and that capacity to come in as an employee now and like just readjust some of their work for like their processes into enabling or enhancing AI applicability for them.
You could make the argument that an MBA successfully positions you for an AI world, then it's the best investment of your career.
Yeah, it is, but I'll also be very sober and say, like there's obviously some level of risk or perceived risk that some of the jobs won't be there because of AI.
Mm.
I think that precisely because of that concern, at least for me on the personal side, I think that that's why I'm investing in my MBA at the moment, just to be able to regear and repurpose myself for that change that's inevitably coming from my perspective.
Interesting. So let's talk about we've talked a little bit about the Wharton curriculum and what it's like in class. What's it like outside of class? So I've heard, for example, that Wharton has quite a good or a strong sort of pub tradition, for example. Is that true?
Yeah, it is. It is extremely social. So that hasn't changed. I think at all. I know it's the case in many other MBAs as well, but from our perspective, I think it's highly social. The class size is slightly bigger than some other MBAs, so we're
Mm.
around 900 people, like each class. So you really have a lot of chances to meet a lot of different people, make connections, and that comes through social events, the club organizations, and then travel as well. So I'll say it's pretty active. We go to class, to our class schedules from Monday to Thursday. So Fridays are off, and obviously the weekend. So a lot of people do travel over that period, or just have more social events. I'd say it's super active all the time. Like I can see that we use campus groups. I think a lot of schools use campus groups. You can see just events every single week or every single day
Mm.
for different things.
We were talking before we started recording. There's fight night happening. Is it tomorrow?
Yeah, it's tomorrow.
Tell me
So
about that.
it's a quite unique event that happens at Wharton. I'd say that each school has, I guess, its own traditions and its own set of particular events. At Wharton, I would say that like two things that like set it apart are hockey. So we have a hockey beer league, and a lot of students participate in that throughout the whole year. I'm a participant, and then we also have Fight Night, which is a unique event that happens yearly. It's like sort of like a charitable fundraiser where students from the MBA community that are a part of the boxing club box against students from the from the UPenn graduate community. So that might be the law
Epic.
school, the medicine school, just the graduate school in general. And they go on these fights, at an event. Everybody wears, it's a black tux, event, and then we have an after party. It's pretty fun. It'll be my first
Bang.
year attending, and it's tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof. Well, let me know how that goes. If I never see you again, it's been a pleasure.
Well, I'm not fighting. I'm not fighting,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah.
But you're
It'll be
partying by the
interesting.
sounds of it.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the other thing that Wharton's known for outside of the classroom is the leadership ventures. It's something that they have asked about, for example, in team-based discussions recently. Have you been involved in any leadership ventures?
So they are pretty interesting. We have a whole department called the McNulty Leadership, like just venture department,
Mhm.
where yeah, there's varying like internship like varying sorry leadership ventures that people go to, and those are for anyone that's not heard of them, they're like sort of like treks where beyond the external and physical nature of it, the purpose is to develop your leadership skills while you're out there. So I've not participated in any of them. I'm scheduled to participate in what they call an intensive in the next few weeks. So my intensive is just a marine training core course in Quantico. It's a 2 day. There's another one that's the FDNY, so the Fire Department of New York, also does a training
So cool.
similar to that. And then some of the other leadership ventures, they're just they just place you. It's this idea of the stretch experience as well. Again, just placing you in environments where you're not necessarily an expert, or can control every single aspect of it, and then you're supposed to lead one day of getting from point A to point B, and how you lead the whole team of people that are there with you in the venture to get to that objective. And towards the end of it, you're supposed to sort of like have a brief discussion with your team about what went wrong, what went right, and hear feedback on that. So it's really leadership training at the extreme.
Wow. Sounds really intense.
Yeah, it is. It is from what I've heard. I'm super excited to participate and then just go to more of them. And they really go to very nice places like Patagonia. Some of them are sailing. Some of them are going to the Atacama Desert.
Mm.
And there's even one in Antarctica that happens. I think every other year. So yeah, it's pretty interesting stuff.
Are they quite expensive?
They can be expensive. It depends on the location, and it is extra to the MBA program. So
Right.
that's like interesting and like important to consider. I guess from a budgeting standpoint, once you're in, like you really have to, budget all these different things, including trips, the club activities and whatnot. But I think they're worth it, in terms of what you gain from it. Everybody that I know that's a second year that has done it, they can be quite gruesome in terms of the physical activity for some people. But I think everybody has had a very positive experience in terms of like the growth perspective they've embarked while they're there. It's like a 5 to 7 day process, but yeah,
Brilliant.
I think it's worth it.
It sounds so cool. You can't go to Wharton and not do a leadership venture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it's quite unique. It's a true differentiator of the school. Like now, to have said that, there's other ways to participate in sort of like these outdoor activities.
Uh-huh.
Maybe not so much with that leadership training aspect of it, but like at a cheaper, price
Yeah,
tag. We have an outdoors club that does many of the treks, like for example, like scaling Kilimanjaro or going to Patagonia.
cool.
that type of outdoor activity trek that if you really wanted to at a cheaper price tag, that's also available.
Yeah, and I guess you kind of get some of the leadership benefits from them anyway as well. That's
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
The other thing that I was interested in is that Wharton has its satellite campus in San Francisco. Have you heard of anyone like have you been or heard of anyone going? What's the story there?
I haven't been. And it is in San Francisco. Most of the gearing towards, or just naturally is towards more tech focused, either recruiting or tech focused, courses.
Mhm.
We there are It's like a full semester you can apply and like just be there.
Mhm.
But you gotta be mindful. Obviously, for me, like it doesn't make a lot of sense because it's out of my 4 semesters. I really don't want to spend one of them fully in San Francisco. My objective is not really moving to the West Coast. So, for me, it doesn't make sense. But I do know of people that have done it. Just move there for the full semester, and you're taking classes specifically with that cohort of people. It's like a smaller. I'll mention. It's quite interesting because at school, I really didn't know this from before, but I guess the dual track MBA. So I guess Lauder plus the MBA or HCM plus the MBA or the JD MBA. Those communities are quite unique in the sense that they're very cohesive and they're very close together. So the people that do those dual MBAs, they're very close together. I think that something similar happens when you're in the San Francisco semester. Those the people that attend tend to mesh and do a quite unique and have a quite unique group. Having said that, there are other opportunities to go to the San Francisco campus. There like these block week courses, what we call them, that happen during the fall break and the spring break, where for a week you can take sort of an intensive course. And some of them are at the San Francisco campus if people really wanted to, do that.
Hmm. It's quite interesting that you can split, yeah, East West Coast. The only sort of other way you would do that, and I heard people saying like I'm applying to schools in Chicago so that I can go East Coast, West Coast, kind of, and do it that way around. So it's interesting that you could do one of your semesters there. Okay, that's cool. What about being in Philly generally? Studying, living, recruiting out of Philly. How's that been?
Yeah, so I'll mention I used to live in New York for a long time in my career. So
Uh-huh.
I was generally on the upper, like on the northeast
Mhm.
side of the U.S. But I never lived in Philly. I found the city to be quite unique and charming. The food scene is great here, and as a student, I gotta say that and not to diss any of the New York schools, but one thing that concerned me about being a student again and just in the MBA was sort of like the cost of living in any of the cities, and New York, for instance, was one that I was really concerned about.
Mhm.
I hadn't found that reality here. Everything is very affordable in Philly, and I think like Chicago, for instance, is also a very affordable city. From the bar scene, the restaurant scene, and like just also like the living, as a whole. So I really love Philly. It's been great. One thing to your question about like Philly, living in general that I think has been quite helpful has been the recruiting side of things. The proximity to New York without being in New York necessarily has been quite helpful. For recruiting purposes, as you mentioned, I recruited for investment banking. I had to go back and forth to New York a lot. So I was taking the Amtrak. It's like an hour and a half away on the Amtrak. So you sit on the train, and the commute is quite helpful. Like thinking about like having been in the Midwest, it would have been very hard for me to, be taking 2 3 hour plane rides in and out of New York and then having to get a hotel. I think that that's a cost and like an extra, time commitment that I wasn't really thinking when I was making my selection for schools, but I'm really glad that it ended up being Philly. And
Can you
like,
give us
yeah,
can you
yeah,
give us
yeah,
an
and like going
idea?
West Coast would have been insane. Yeah.
How,
Yeah.
yeah,
Sorry, son.
almost impossible. How many times would you estimate you went from Philly to New York to secure your internship?
It was a lot. So probably 25 plus trips back and forth. So the recruiting process is quite intense. You start, so let's say, officially you start in October and it runs all the way to December. And that's and some schools do start earlier. Just want to make that clear. There's people from like applying to other schools or thinking about other schools that are reviewing this. At Wharton, we just have a focused period of time where we're protected from companies contacting us from August to October. And the idea there is that we can focus on building community and then, focus on the academic side of the school. But starting October, it's open season. So we start going to information sessions, which it's a fancy way of saying, like just sort of the banks coming on campus or the companies coming on campus and talking to us about like the opportunities that they have open and giving us a little of the culture and whatnot. And then after that, you start filling in these interest forms and applying in some form or way to getting coffee chats, which to my surprise, there's no coffee involved. It's just like talking to people for 20-30 minutes on like these informational interviews where you're getting more information from them and they're getting to meet you and know you. And then as soon as that's done, like it's like 1 or 2 weeks, then you start going to New York every single week. So as I mentioned, we don't have classes on Friday. Every Friday I was there. And that is either in more coffee chats, like interviews with the different banks or the different people across the different firms, or in events that like the firms are hosting for us as Wharton or as an MBA event with different schools as well. So it's quite intense. As a plug for anybody going into Wharton, there are these passes that you can get on Amtrak that are like just a flat fare, 10 passes you can get for like, I don't know, like 2 months. That ended up being my best friend, because the prices do go up. It's dynamic, in nature. So, you can end up getting a $10 ticket, like a $10 train ride, or a $200 train ride, depending on, the day and, just supply and dynamics.
Top tip, and I can confirm that we are not sponsored by Amtrak over here. That is genuine. It's genuine advice. That's really really cool. So you reckon you went 20 something times from Philly to New York? How many? And you mentioned you're in banking. How many companies is it typical for an MBA to apply to? Let's focus on the finance kind of world. How you're in
Sure.
finance, you're doing your MBA on a sort of with a finance focus. You want to break into investment banking or a finance role. How many companies would you typically apply to?
So from the companies that were interested in coming on campus and talking to us, I'd say it was 15 to 20 companies
Okay.
came and spoke with us. Probably applied to all of them initially, just to get those coffee chats in. Um, and from there, you start getting cut, throughout the different months and weeks. You start getting more and more funneled into, and you start also meeting more of the teams that like you're really getting a good connection with and really establishing good rapport. So say I probably started with 15, 20 companies. And that's general, Sam. So, like you just apply for the general MBA internship role. It's not like team specific or product specific initially. And then throughout the
Or school
process,
specific, I assume.
it
They
is a little bit school specific because they post on our website, on the Wharton website, and you apply through that link, so they know from a back end HR recruiting
Mhm.
perspective that you're coming in from your MBA.
Right.
There are other opportunities that I did apply outside of school, that were bank, for the general MBA population. So that one would have been like not school specific.
Mhm.
And I would say like probably there was like 5 or 6 banks that didn't come on campus that I was interested in talking to them, that I applied, from outside of our normal, bullpen of
Mhm.
companies. And then you start getting more and more involved with the teams and like with the specific groups within the banks, and then you continue the process with them, and that includes networking events, these type of like just events that where you go to New York, or they come to Philly, where the bank or the group hosts you to just for you to make more connections with the different MDs, associates, analysts on the team.
Hmm. And so that's sort of the casual part of the interview process, but I presume it gets quite hardcore later. What does the next part of the interview process look like?
Yeah, sure. So quite interesting because it is more of the soft, what I was discussing. It's obviously more of the soft skills perspective of getting that report and that connection, but it is
Sure.
quite gruesome because it just goes from October to December. It is a series of cuts, from these informational interviews, and it can get quite despairing because you might have started with 15, and then at the end by December, when the actual hard part, which is the actual interview process, starts, you might have two banks or three or four or six,
Yeah.
depending on how successful you were during the process. So it is quite nerve-wracking that the process starts falling down to the point where you get the final interview, and the final interview will be very binary on how you do on the interview, because that's more of a hard skills test. But the whole process, just to put in perspective, is you start in October, as I mentioned. You go through all this, sort of like coffee chat, networking event, more soft skill build up to December, and then in December, you actually get invited into the super late process, or like the first round interview process, which just takes you into the super late process. So the first round interviews happen in December, let's say like beginning of December to mid December. If you're successful there, and that's an actual technical interview, more of a formal interview, which might be just a single round, or it could be two or three, 4 rounds, depending on the bank and depending on the team. From there, if you're successful, you get an invite to the super day process. And the super day process, how it works, at least at Wharton, is that when we come back for the spring semester before it starts in January, so we go off on break. You do all these things in December, you go off on break, and then when you come back, you have a week of concentrated recruiting timeline, which is quite intense because in that week you fit all the interviews, now the formal interviews in terms of super days, that you got from all the banks. So it could be a full week of just back to back interviews with different companies, where you're
Wow.
trying to secure the internship for like the summer.
Just a
But
reminder,
after
this is
that,
just
you're
for the
done.
internship.
Yeah.
Whoa. And after that, you're done. And so when do you find out?
So I found out mid January. So that week is beginning week of January. Then a few days off, and then you get calls from banks, and then you decide.
I remember. So we both. So So in the end, you got a internship at Bank of America Merrill Lynch.
Yeah.
Congratulations. I.
Thank
It's
you.
so funny. My first banking internship was also Bank of America Merrill Lynch in London, but very a weird kind of parallel there. That's so interesting. So you're going to intern in this coming summer in the gap between your first and second years, and that's a what 10-week internship typically.
It's a 10-week internship. Yeah.
Okay, and are you going to be rotating at all? Like, what does an MBA internship at a bank look like?
So it really depends, and it's a very good question, Sam, because it'll depend on the bank. So some banks
Uh-huh.
have these sort of like, yeah, like rotational. In like, I don't know if it's like fully rotational, but like say you're again, this is all for investment banking, right? So some banks have general program like internships, where you're coming in as an intern, and you can really be staffed and work in like many different groups, with many different groups, depending on what the need is. So you might end up working in an industrials case, and then you might work in financial institutions, with the financial institutions group, during your internship. And that is really based on how they run their analyst and associate program after you're out of the internship and into as a full time,
Mhm.
because they really don't align an associate with a specific team for the first year or the first year and a half while they're working. So
Mhm.
that's not necessarily the case everywhere. I think banks like Jefferies, Centerview, and like don't quote me if I'm wrong, but just like thinking, some of these banks they have that model, and then the majority of the other banks, you really recruit specific for the team that you want to work in. So Bank of America, JP Morgan, Goldman, Citi, you recruit for the specific team you want to work on, and whether that is a product group or just a coverage group, um, you really recruit for that, and that happened all throughout the process prior. So from October to December, you're really meeting that team that you're going to
Mhm.
be working in, and though that's the team that really extends you an offer, really extends you an invitation to interview, and then the offer if you're obviously successful.
Okay. And which team are you going to be part of?
I'm going to be in the leverage finance team, high
Leverage
yield bonds.
financing. Interesting. Could you very high level explain what that means to people who are coming into this from a pre-MBA background?
Yeah, sure. So it's a capital markets group within banking, and normally like the quickest way to I guess describe it, it's a team that provides debt financing for high yield companies. So companies more on the speculative grade of things, a little bit like riskier than full investment grade.
Mhm.
Um, and mostly what it's been used in the past few decades is for these leverage buyout transactions where private equity companies want to tack on debt in order to acquire target companies that they're looking at. So it's mostly that. It's also syndicating some of those loans afterwards. Syndicating just means selling parts of the loan out to other investors that want to participate on the debt side of things.
Mhm. It's super interesting. Okay, so you very much focused down the IB recruitment track for internships. You did a fantastic job of securing this offer, and again, congratulations on your internship. It sounds like not everybody was so lucky. Sounds like it's been a difficult. It's quite a difficult market out there at the moment. What's your read of that?
So I think it is difficult. I don't have any official data or numbers, and I think that
Okay.
most of the schools will publish that for like August or something about their. I don't know if they do it for the internship publicly, for like public consumption, but they do definitely do it for their second years going into full time roles. I think it's been hard, not just at Wharton, just anecdotally, what I've heard from my team, from like my friends, in other schools throughout the Northeast, is that it's been hard from the normal banking and consulting tracks versus last year. From an internship standpoint, feels like 60% of the offers were given, around 60%. And again, these are not official numbers. It's just my pulse on the situation
Mhm.
versus what was the case last year. It also feels like more people were interested this year, at least at Wharton, in participating in the recruiting process for banking, which is interesting in two ways. And like when you think about it, like recruiting happens from what we call like sort of like the more structured recruiting, which would be banking and consulting, which happen as soon as you're on campus and even before. And I can get into that a little bit pre-MBA process, but saying officially as soon as you're on campus, you start recruiting for the consulting and the investment banking roles. And the consulting process is very similar in terms of timeline to what I discussed for the banking side of things. Also, from September, October onto December, you're meeting with the companies, and then you go and like do your interview in January. Um, and so traditionally, I feel like people that were looking into being, I guess, being more opportunistic with their opportunities or more open to risk. They would not do that process at the beginning and then just wait for just in time recruiting, which happens in spring, or look to do their own entrepreneurial venture. But it's interesting that a lot of people this year, relative to last year, decided to do these two recruiting tracks. Maybe more, my take is maybe looking more for safety.
Mhm.
Just thinking about what's going to happen in
Lock
the
something
next few
in.
years. Yeah, lock something in versus not. So a quite
Interesting.
interesting take. There's still a lot of people involved in entrepreneurship. There's been a huge push, for example, for entrepreneurship through acquisition. ETA is a thing across MBA campuses, and like at Wharton, it is certainly a thing.
Uh-huh.
But maybe relative to the prior years, it's waned off a little bit as people see a little more, maybe more risk on the labor market
Mhm.
post MBA.
Super interesting. So you think more people applying to the structured programs, banking and consulting in particular, because maybe just wanting to get an extra bite at the apple, an extra, give themselves ideally lock something in earlier in their MBA. And maybe if that doesn't work out, then they follow the sort of DIY recruiting path, as we said, anyway. And then you think as a result, maybe the proportion of people who are getting offers, internship offers in those early stage pipeline recruiting processes is maybe down a bit on the
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that is the case. And then it is important, like an extra component there is that like sometimes the just-in-time recruiting, which is just think of it like P's, private equities, or
yeah.
tech in it of it, or marketing or general corporate development programs. They
Mhm.
tend to happen when companies either smaller in size or more.
Mhm.
I guess they have less of a formal structured process for interns in the summer. They start thinking about recruiting in March, or getting interns in March and April.
Mhm.
Those processes, historically, from my understanding, they have not converted into full-time offers
Mhm.
in the same ratio or degree as consulting and banking have. So that's another perspective on
Sure.
risk there, to consider.
Another attraction for those structured processes, another reason why you would perhaps get pushed that way in a difficult job market.
Pretty
Interesting.
much, yeah.
So, if you were to ballpark it, what proportion of people on these consulting and banking internships convert their offers to full-time offers, their internships to full-time offers?
I think that once you have the internship, and again, this is not official numbers
Sure.
or anything on in any way, but my understanding, and like also having done banking prior to coming to Wharton, so I did banking, and then I did my family business for a little bit prior,
Mhm.
but I also had interned back then, so this comes a little bit colored in through that perspective of an undergrad interning in banking. I think that when you get that offer, there is a genuine headcount projection from the company prior to you getting on, where if you do your job well and you network, and really like do like the things you're supposed to do while you're in the internship well enough, you probably will get a return offer. Obviously nothing is safe or secure, and like ever. But I think that there is a path to that in consulting and in banking.
Mhm.
It's not necessarily the case if you're interning in these other type of companies roles, where they might just be looking for highly specialized or highly skilled labor for that 10-week period, over the summer, and then they'll see again if they have a need like come like next year.
Yeah, really interesting. Okay, so the other thing that's been a part of your recruitment process, or your process, I believe, is the pre-MBA work that you've been doing. I was looking at your LinkedIn earlier. You're part of the Toigo Foundation, Management Leaders of Tomorrow. Tell me how have these played into your job hunt and recruiting process?
Yep, sure. So they're two great organizations. For like Toigo is more on the finance side of things, so, and MLT is also finance, but it could also be consulting and like just generally tech as well.
Mhm.
These two organizations provide me an opportunity to engage prior to the start of my MBA. So once I was admitted, I knew I was gearing up towards going to the MBA, but there's sort of like I got admitted round two. So there was like a 4 to 6 month period where sort of like dead in terms of like, you've done all this work, you got admitted. And then nothing happens until August. You might be working still, or you might not be working, but there's sort of like this dead no man's land there. And I found these two organizations. I knew people had participated before or prior to their MBA starts, and they had gotten a lot of value from them. So I applied and I joined. And I'm very happy with the network and like the opportunity they provided for me.
Mhm.
But it is really being able to tap into that pre MBA market. In for instance, MLT has this conference that they do. I don't know if it's always in Washington, but they did it in Washington prior to the start of my MBA, and they have sort of like this job fair where you can meet with consulting firms, banking firms, and general management firms to see if you can do a pre-MBA internship prior to your MBA. I didn't end up doing any pre-MBA internships. I'll mention that there was a big shift also from, I think, like 2 years ago to last year in terms of most of these um, incentives or programs were focused towards diversity hires. So there's a waning off from the programs from 2 years ago to like last year. So a lot of the banks, for instance, didn't participate anymore. Most of the consultants, most of the MBBs were still there. Um, and some of the general management companies were there, as well still. But there was a waning off a little bit in terms of that pre-MBA opportunity. Those programs still exist, and like if you qualify for those, either you're a woman or you're diversity hire, or, like you're associated to like just championing diversity opportunities, I think that you can still apply.
Mhm.
But some of them didn't really exist when it came into the process. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's part of the
Uh,
program. While you're there, they do give you training. You do get coaching from both of these programs. It's quite good. You get an opportunity, obviously, to meet like people before, and the networking piece is extremely important during the MBA. So I got the opportunity to not just meet people that were going to Wharton, but people that were going to other MBAs also for my start year. So
Sure.
it's quite
And
interesting.
for anyone interesting, we'll add links to both of those in the comments below this video. Okay,
Sure.
you've sparked a thought. Another thing that sort of part of this theme of sort of diversity as part of applications was the consortium. You applied with a consortium, didn't you? And so, can you tell me about that application process and whether you found the economies of scale, so to speak, that the consortium promises to applicants?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I got to say the consortium was a great, opportunity and a great program
Hmm.
that I found through, again, a referral. So I
Hmm.
knew somebody had done the consortium prior to my MBA, and it was great for them. When I looked into it, it's about like the mission of the consortium is to champion access to the job market and higher education for diverse candidates or people, pushing, diversity in general terms. So it made a lot of sense for me. When I looked at the member organizations that were part of the consortium when I applied that year I applied, um, a lot of them were the schools I wanted to, go. There were only three schools that I had to apply outside of the consortium.
Hmm.
Um, but in general terms, I didn't know how efficient or how helpful it was going to be when I first started applying. But it was extremely, extremely beneficial for me. As you mentioned, Sam, the economies of scale were there. You still have to do so, like just level setting a little bit. Like you have to do three essays specific to the consortium, which for again, I don't know if this has changed, but when I apply, it was like prior, during, and post your MBA. How do you intend to bring in or help them with their mission of championing diversity in the
Yep.
post like work force, and then during the MBA process. So those are the three essays specific to the consortium. But then it allowed you to use sort of the same, similar to the Common App when you're in undergrad in the US, allow you to use your same biographical information, educational history, uh, uh, work history, and all these things that you have to sort of like fill in again and again throughout your many different applications. one time. And then the most important thing for me was my recommenders. When I sent the letters of recommendation, I really didn't want to, have to send 15, 10, 7, 5 different, links to the people that were going to recommend me, because that would have meant that I would have had to have probably like 25 different recommenders, because you can't really ask someone to, go in and fill it in like 10 times.
Mm.
And the benefit there was that through the consortium, they could submit just one, and it would serve for all the schools that were members of the consortium. And then, that was the most significant part of the economies of scale. I'll mention though that there are school specific essays that you still have to, build. It's not as if, you can only
Sure.
do three and then, just the letters of recommenders. You still have to do the school specific essays. For instance, Duke was a member, and like you had to do the 25, things, at
Random
Duke,
things.
it's still, like that still carries over.
Hmm.
NYU still had their picture essay. The very unique essays are still there and part of the application process. It's just a way, I guess, that for me on the recommender side of things, and then on the biographical side of things, it allowed
Right.
me to be super quick, and then just focus more time on what I thought was the more important aspect of the application process, which was letting myself come through in the specific essays for the schools.
Yeah, exactly. It's really just the portals and the LORs that get streamlined, isn't it? And you
Yeah,
still have to do the essays, you still have to do the videos, all of these other things. Cool. And I think one of your many scholarships was linked to Consortium as well. Am I right?
yeah. So I'm not sure what, this piece, and how, the scholarship money is allocated by the schools, but there
Hmm.
was definitely mentions of consortium fellowship being granted to me when I got accepted into, some of the schools I got accepted in, specifically tied into the consortium. So I think that it helped definitely in terms of scholarship money.
Yeah. I think schools might be moving away from that a little bit at the moment, right? There's a slight pivot away, but I'm sure there is still an element of diversity focused scholarships, whether it's consortium or elsewhere, that are part of their pot, how they think of their pot of money. So tell me about the scholarship specifically then. So I think because as far as your application goes, the highlight for me was this massive scholarship number that you ended up with. I was tallying the numbers before our call. Mario in total got $851,200 of scholarship money from various different scholarships and different schools in total. But it was not easy. And it was not obviously a check that you got to cash for 800 and whatever $1,000. So can you walk us through the scholarship, like how you ended up with that scholarship offer, how much is actually translated into your tuition bills, etc. Walk me through that.
Sure, sure. So I'll mention, I guess, I'll give you like the breakdown in terms of the applications, and then
Uh-huh.
answer some of the questions. So as I mentioned, 12 schools were through the consortium, three schools were outside of the consortium.
Wow. So 15 schools in total. So that's the first
Yeah,
thing about this scholarship. How do you get a lot of scholarship money? One, apply to a lot of schools.
yeah, pretty much. It helps. It helps. Then out of those 15, I got 11 interview offers, from which, thankfully, like I didn't get a rejection from those 11. I just got two wait lists. And then from those nine acceptances, I got eight, offers for scholarship. And as you were mentioning, some of them were tied to, consortium fellowship offers. Um, I guess that it's interesting because, like obviously looking, hindsight 2020, like now those were the numbers, but when they were coming through, it was quite nerve wracking. Prior to, getting the interviews, I had gotten a couple rejections, from not even getting interviews out, or, going through a process. And I was like, oh, wow, this is looking bad. But then they started flowing through, and I think it's like from March to April. And keep me honest, I'm here, but like, for the round two, you start getting these callbacks, and like the emails from the school saying that you're accepted. And given that the scholarships are merit based, they're tied to your acceptance letter. So when you get the acceptance, you get the amount, or you get the information on the scholarship amount. And I was fortunate enough to have had all these scholarship offers, I think that they were being quite honest, very very much tied to that DEI effort and like inclusion, that signal that my consortium application was sending through, and I'm very glad and helpful for that. In some instances, I got to negotiate a little bit, like when I had like, so at the end when I had all the schools that had accepted me, I'd made a short list of where I was really interested
Mhm.
in going, and like so I had like an honest discussion with the admissions officers at like uh 2 or 3 schools about the monetary package, and like seeing if from a financial need and also from a merit need, they could potentially up the amount, given that in some of the schools I had received full tuition offers,
Wow.
um and just seeing how that could work. um it it is quite interesting to say though that, like, to your question of how much that translated into actual, like the bill in at the MBA, like zero of it translated into the MBA, because the only school I didn't receive anything for was Wharton, and they're quite specific about negotiating the
Yeah.
scholarship amount. I do not regret my decision, but yeah, it's unfortunate that none of it translated into the final
Interesting.
bill.
It's an interesting point. So I was looking through our stats from before our conversation, and while the M7 schools in general are open to negotiating to some degree, right? It's at 50, 100K we've seen come out of scholarship negotiations, very common. But recently, Wharton not budging. Really interesting takeaway. So Wharton are not budging on their scholarships. They make an offer and that's it. And so for those watching, if scholarship is a really, really big focus, yeah, Mario's story is really important. Diversify your applications. Sure, include those really high ranked competitive schools, but also if you really are dependent on scholarship money, diversify. Because Mario turned down a full ride scholarship and went to Wharton. That is a big decision. And a lot of people, or some people, might not have made the same decision there. Super interesting. Mario, as we kind of wrap this up, then, do you think you made the right decision?
I think I did. Obviously, it'll depend on how things play out, and I can't see like 20 years into the future, 40 years into the future.
Uh-huh.
But I really like the program. I really like the people I've met and the opportunities, and not only that, but like the access that the school has given me to people at the top of their career, not only within finance but in many different fields. Um, I think that at the end of the day, and then to be very frank, most schools will offer people the capacity to make that connection and build that community, and that will depend on like, one, your personality. Like, so go really with your gut feeling of where you feel like you'll fit in, you'll be accepted, and you'll be able to build that network, because I think that that's the key aspect from the whole MBA process for me. It was Wharton, and I'm very glad with the community I've built.
Hmm.
uh has it been worth it? We'll see. Like, from an immediate standpoint, it's helpful. Certainly learned a lot. Have been able to get my internship for the summer. um would I've been able to learn these things, or even go to Bank of America without the MBA? Probably. Like, I'm not, it's not a definite, but the long-term effects in the network that I'm building right now, I think it would not have been possible without the MBA. And again, the level of access I've gone into has been quite unique. So, TD, let's talk in like 40 years. But yeah, I think it's been
I'll hold you to that. We'll be an
helpful.
interview on Sandwich Consulting when we're both in like our 60s.
Yeah.
So, Mario, how's, how's it going? Brilliant stuff. Hey, Mario, thank you so much for sharing your story. Really, really interesting. Really, really appreciate it. Best of luck with your internship in this coming summer. I hope you secure the return offer. And if you do secure the return offer, I hope they give you a nice sign-on bonus to help cover some of the costs. And yeah, we'll stay in touch. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Sam. Pleasure.